America is more than a place. It's a promise, which we strive daily to realize. And when our politics veers away from that promise,
Nobody likes me.
it is our solemn duty to stand up and demand better. Now is that time, and the Convention on Founding Principles is our chance. Thank you for joining this movement to chart a better, more principled way forward for the nation.
Good evening and welcome back to the Convention on Founding Principles. I'm Shermichael Singleton, and it's my bittersweet privilege to host this, our fourth and final night. We started on Monday remembering the words of Benjamin Franklin, "A republic if you can keep it." We heard from speakers highlighting the dangers of lies, racism, bigotry, and immoral leadership, and offering us ideas for a better way forward. Night two, we dove into Lincoln's famous description of America, a government of the people, a government for the people, to discuss ways we can ensure that this democratic republic remains in the hands of the people. Which brought us to last night, a shining city on a hill, Reagan's famous metaphor for American liberty, reminding us that this great experiment in human freedom is still the last and best hope for humanity. Tonight, we close our convention not with fear or anger, but with hope for the future. Quoting Dr. King, out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope. And ladies and gentlemen, let me be the first to tell you that tonight there's a reason for hope. We've all felt it this week, and it's thanks to you. That's why we asked you to send us your own CFP 2020 speeches. We all love the responses we got, and I got to tell you, I saw some of them. They were all great. But we wanted to share a few tonight, and guess what? Some of you will be lucky enough to see yourselves during the program. So I want to bring in my friends, Evan and Mindy. Evan, I want to go to you first. And as I mentioned, we have seen some of those clips, and they are absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Shermichael. And, we've heard these amazing speeches all week long about these 13 principles that our delegates have now ratified and that everyone can see on the website of the convention, cfp2020.us. But, this morning, as you mentioned, we asked our viewers to send in their own speeches on our founding principles and speeches on other related issues. And there was one in particular, although there were many good ones, as you point out, they were all great, those that I saw, but one really stuck out to me. And that was from a gentleman named Sheldon in Atlanta. And maybe Sheldon, you're watching tonight. He mentioned it's his birthday next week, so happy birthday in advance, Sheldon. But Sheldon told us that he is a retired physician and an Army vet and during the Vietnam era. And he had stumbled upon this convention somehow online. Maybe he saw one of the advertisements for it. I'm not sure. But he'd said that he's been a Democrat his whole life, I think, but he's voted for Republicans and Democrats at all levels of government until Trump was elected president. And since then, he's been very concerned about the direction of our country. He's been very worried. He conveyed some emotion that made it clear that he feels the way many of us have felt over the last 4 years, that perhaps our country has really gone in the wrong direction, and he's worried about its future. But he said a weight had been lifted from his shoulders upon finding this convention and listening to the speeches, and how excited he was to spend the rest of his life, and hopefully there are many more years to come, Sheldon, but spend the rest of his life working with us for what he called a restoration. He said we need to restore our government. And let me just tell you that the thing that I found so powerful about that is that what he said, what Sheldon said, is an example, is evidence of the unifying power of the principles we've been talking about all week. I think a lot of people, when they hear us talking about founding principles, they sort of think we're, maybe democracy geeks, and these founding principles are maybe interesting on a philosophical level, but they don't really have much impact on our lives. But that's not why we talk about them. To the contrary, we talk about them because they do impact our lives. Our country has succeeded when we've been committed to these principles, and we've suffered greatly, eventually at least, when we've abandoned them or turned our backs on them. And we're living that reality right now in the country. And so we talk about these founding principles, these 13 principles in particular that the delegates have ratified, because they're critical to our country, to our prosperity, to our livelihoods, to our standards of living, to the peace that we feel in our hearts as we go about our lives. And I was just so encouraged by Sheldon's video and the other videos. And I would encourage other viewers to go to our website, cfp2020.us, and submit your own, please.
Absolutely. And Sheldon, I think I speak on behalf of all of us here. Thank you for your service. Happy birthday. And I do remember in your video, you said, I pray that I get 15 more years. My friend, I pray that same prayer. Mindy, I want to turn to you. And Evan brought up the 13 principles, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Why do you think the principles is resonating so much with so many people? I mean, Sheldon, again, a Democrat, randomly found our convention and has been tuning in every single night. There's something that we are doing here that's working.
Yeah, that's right. What we have right now in the country is a voting base, citizens who are just growing ever more exhausted. They are tired of the division. They are tired of the chaos. They are tired of the negativity and the bad news. They're tired of leaders who seem to be putting their own self-interest before their interest of the country and their constituents, and who won't work together and do their jobs to address the major challenges of our time. And, they're tired of this president and how he just sucks up all of the oxygen in the room. And it just seems that, every day it's some new norm that's broken. It is some new person or group that's been criticized. It is some new, drama that's surrounding his White House. It's another, member of his team that has been indicted. They are just exhausted. And so when we now come to them with this convention and we dial things back, we peel back the layers and we go back to core founding principles, adapted for our time, I think that's just so refreshing, because it does kind of push away a lot of the other noise and the chaos. And it reminds them that we have these, timeless, really beautiful principles that made our nation the most powerful nation on earth in less than 2 centuries. And it makes them proud to be an American. And I think it does give them hope that if we're able to move forward and try to achieve that more perfect union on the backs of these principles, that there really is hope in the future, that America's future, really can be brighter, certainly than it is today, but maybe than it's ever been before.
No, Mindy, I think you're absolutely right. And I want to thank Mindy, and I also want to thank Evan. Thank you guys so much for your commentary. Up next, our next speaker is no stranger to political reform and renewal himself. John Kingston has been working to combat Trumpism from the start, and last week he launched a new effort with Stand Up Republic, Christians Against Trumpism and Political Extremism.
You all know that famous John Adams quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Starting with people of my Christian faith, we have lost our standing and our witness in society. We have lost it with good reason, because we are as racist, materialist, politicized, and polarized as the culture around us. And unfortunately, sometimes we're leading the way in those dark categories. Because of all that and more, I'm calling for an American awakening, have launched an organization and written a book which lays out the road to get there. It's time to become a moral and religious people, starting with my people of faith, and then advance that in our republic. But often, it isn't enough to stand for good things. You have to stand against darkness. Which brings us to the launch of Christians Against Trumpism and Political Extremism, which I launched last week with Stand Up Republic. And I'm going to put my shoulder into that, along with all of our American awakening efforts. Bottom line, it's time for fundamental reform, to finally recall who we are as people of faith and people of the Republic, and reground and lean into the darkness of the days. Now, it's easy to despair. But I have some good news for us here and for America. There are no lost causes. T.S. Eliot put it best in 1929. If we take the widest and wisest view of a cause, there's no such thing as a lost cause because there's no such thing as a gained cause. We fight for lost causes because we know that our defeat and dismay may be the preface to our successor's victory, though that victory itself will be temporary. We fight rather to keep something alive than in the expectation that anything will actually triumph. In other words, certain virtues and values transcend this moment, this year, this White House. As we assume the mantle to fight for those virtues and values, we've already won. We're carrying the torch from one location to the other. The fact that we're carrying the torch to this present darkness doesn't make the journey less important. It makes it more important for our country and for our souls. When I was a boy, I pretended to fight the bad guys with my toy guns and imagined battles. Well, here we are with a real opportunity to fight back against the darkness, and I, for one, am grateful. It's an honor to live in important times, one in which loving your neighbor and considering all as equals feels like a revolutionary act, both in my church and in our country. We were born for this moment. As much as we lament what is happening in our nation, we are part of this country, and we are not going anywhere. Yes, things are bad. But we've been here before in even darker times. My American heroes, who may be your heroes too, were in even more dire straits. Frederick Douglass overcame the slavery of his youth to become the greatest of all American ideals proponents. Abraham Lincoln led a nation to a bloody civil war because he believed that America was the last best hope for the world. Martin Luther King sat alone in a Birmingham prison while his own people of faith, told him to abandon his mission for America to finally make good on his promissory note that all are created equal. 2 out of those 3 died for that cause, which is what, in part, makes them our heroes. But millions of other Americans also sacrificed their lives for this. So many whose names we do not know. And tens and hundreds of millions more fought for and built this foundation we stand on. We may not have to die for this cause, although I'm confident that many of you are prepared to. But as Washington tells Hamilton in Hamilton, dying can be easy, while living is often harder. There are no lost causes, and the good ultimately conquers evil. In the Republic, look to the cloud of witnesses who have gone before us. Douglass, Lincoln, King, and so many others who led us beyond the darkest of days. In the world of faith, look to the story of Judas Thaddeus, he of so-called lost causes. Or even better, look to the story of Judas Iscariot, who appeared to be winning and profiting for a time, but ultimately was no match for he who was love, the author and perfecter of our faith. Because of all of them, this cause is worth fighting for, and the weight of our current circumstance makes our anchoring commitments to faith, hope, and love, and belief in the foundational principles of the Republic shine that much brighter. I will remain in this fight for as long as I have life and breath, and invite all Christians to stand with us against the dark shadow of Trumpism, to reclaim our name and the great legacy and inheritance in the name of our Lord, the one who sacrificed all to set us free. Please visit us at ChristiansAgainstTrumpism.com and join us in this great battle.
Thanks, John. Give us your convention speech by going to cfp2020.us. Again, that's cfp2020.us, and recording your own video. Or if you prefer to be on the other side of the camera, go there and register with the convention so that we can organize, mobilize, and work together towards that hopeful future we all envision. Before we hear from our next speaker, I want to bring in my good friend, Heath Mayo. So Heath, I want to talk a little bit about something that you and I were discussing behind the scenes. And yes, folks, we do talk behind the scenes, and that's voting. That's what's going on with the United States Postal Service and the president. And it appears, Heath, that the president is clearly at least manipulating, I would argue, voters into thinking that the process won't be fair.
You know, that's right, Shermichael. And I got to say, even as a conservative Republican, I mean, lifelong conservative Republican, this whole fight that Republicans have been waging over expanded access to secure voting has just never made any sense to me. I mean, mail-in voting is safe. We have expanded forms of mail-in voting already. It's called absentee voting. And the president and his closest advisors have voted this way for years. So all of this rhetoric that you see from the president about attacks on the postal service and, you know, mail-in voting isn't safe, it comes from a place of fear. I mean, he is scared that more people, the more Americans vote, that he'll lose the election. And Shermichael, if Republicans tend to lose elections when more Americans vote, that doesn't mean that we should fight expanded access to voting reforms. It means that we should fix the Republican Party and make it more competitive.
But Heath, I want to go, I guess, a little deeper into this discussion. There are some people, particularly minorities, particularly African Americans, who live in places like, I believe it was North Carolina or South Carolina, where the Supreme Court stated a year or two ago that Republicans with surgical precision targeted African Americans to make it difficult for them to vote. There are obviously millions of our fellow Americans who are uncertain about the process, who are uncertain that their vote will actually matter or count for anything.
You know, that's right. And when that is a feeling in America, particularly among people who, you know, may be lower income, maybe in rural areas, maybe traditionally disadvantaged in other ways, that is an entire group of Americans whose voices don't make it into the democratic process. And this democratic process that we have in the United States that fuels our constitutional republic, it only works if we all participate in it. For the life of me, I will never understand why Republicans have thought it is a good idea to go out there and wage a war against, you know, expanded secure ways to vote. I mean, and we're talking, these are secure ways. Mail-in voting is a secure way to expand access to voting, and why Republicans continue to push against it and create these diversionary battles against the post office and create this you know, image of widespread fraud, which is just there's no documented evidence of this. It's just putting us on the back foot with a lot of Americans out there who really look at this and say, what are the Republicans talking about?
Right. And Heath, it also makes people not trust the Republican Party. But Heath, thanks so much for joining. Up next, we'll hear from former Congressman and Governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford, and two of our delegates.
Hi, I'm Mark Sanford. I began years ago in business. I went to the University of Virginia for business school. I worked in finance in New York. I had 2 stints in the U.S. Congress where, among other things, I served on the Budget Committee. For 8 years, I was governor of South Carolina, where, again, among other things, we cleaned up more than $1 billion financial hole. And the point of all of this is that I have some degree of experience with budget and government finance. And with that experience, I'm here just to say 3 things, all of which I promise to elaborate on. But first, let me just lay out these 3 thoughts. 1, that principle number 11, that government must exercise responsible stewardship of public finances, lands, and other resources belonging to the people, is in many ways the most important principle. Despite the borrowing binge that we've gone on here lately in Washington, over the long run, if you can't pay for it, you can't have it. And if you borrow long enough and in an unsustainable fashion, as we are now in DC, you're going to reap devastating financial consequences. This makes principle number 11 real important if one wants to avoid those devastating financial consequences. 2, that this principle of adhering to sustainable spending and finances has been ignored in Washington by Republicans and Democrats alike. The Trump administration sadly has taken financial recklessness to new highs, but equally sad is the fact that in the Democratic presidential primary, it seemed nothing more than a bidding war, more versus more. Where we're allowing politicians and political forces to take us here is not all that unusual in looking at the pages of history. But what those same pages show is that to stay on this course will bring horrendous consequences for each one of us and for those that we love. It's vital that every one of us make our voices heard here in saying no more to excessive spending and borrowing. 3, and finally, we're walking our way toward the most predictable financial crisis in the history of man. Those aren't the words of some right-wing financial zealot, a merit badge I would proudly claim, but instead, those are the words of Erskine Bowles, former chief of staff to President Clinton. Bowles co-headed the Bowles-Simpson Commission, and their assessment at its conclusion was dire. And indeed, our situation is just that if we do nothing. So let's dig back into those 3 points and why this principle is so important. On the first point, our founding fathers studied history and saw what happened to civilizations that tried to pretend that math didn't matter. It was disastrous every single time. James Madison said, I go on the principle that a public debt is a public curse, and in a republic, a greater curse than any other. This is not about lofty and principled claims of old guys that died long ago. It's about a principle that made our country great and is alive today as it was when spoken by Thomas Jefferson hundreds of years ago. Making our country great again is not as easy as simply reciting a slogan. It's about adhering to the principles that made our country great, and this is a linchpin principle. Now, I say linchpin for 3 reasons, and I say it purposely. 1, this is a moral principle. Our country was founded on the notion of no taxation without representation. The Bible lists not stealing as one of God's commandments. And yet, you know what a deficit is? It's nothing more than a deferred tax. It's handing the bill for today's government to my 4 sons or your kids or your grandchildren, and that isn't right. It's stealing from them financial opportunities that would be theirs, and again, that's not right. What we leave our kids in financial, environmental, and other terms is not only a moral concept, it's probably the truest indication of what a society really believes when they talk about social equity. 2, it's a principle whose worth has been documented through the pages of history. History is literally littered with the skeletons of civilizations that have spent their way to death. Time and time again, civilizations got to a tipping point where they had to decide whether they went back to the principles that made them great or whether they stayed on a happy but ultimately unsustainable course of upward government spending and upward government consumption. 9 times out of 10, when confronted with the need to return to financial reality, politicians proclaimed, well, this time it's different. But math always worked, and those claims proved in every instance to be the nails in the coffin of that civilization. Let's not let that happen to America. But once again, doing nothing won't change our course. It's vital that you get involved here. Finally, you remember that movie, Jerry Maguire? In it, Tom Cruise plays the role of a beleaguered sports agent whose client at one point in frustration simply yells, "Show me the money!" There are a host of important things that government can and should do. But if these needs are crowded out by wasteful spending or interest costs on the national debt, there is no money to show for the things that we'd like for government to do. The degree to which we would like adequate funding for roads and for defense and healthcare and education will be crowded out by debt and deficits. And the degree to which politicians have set a dangerous course is underscored by 2 simple things. 1, our debt is compounding exponentially, and this is unsustainable. Generally, unsustainable government spending has led to inflation, and this is the great robber of the middle class. In fact, when taken to the extreme, inflation wipes out the middle class and brings in a political strongman and criminal like Adolf Hitler, as it did in Germany after World War I. Our government spending has been leapfrogging lately. I mean, it's insane to look at the numbers. It took us about 200 years to accumulate $5 trillion in national debt. It doubled under President Bush as it went from 5 to 10. It doubled again under President Obama as it went from 10 to 20. And it is well on its way to doubling once again under the 8 years that would mark a 2-term Trump presidency. Now, sadly, Trump can go on and reap millions as a reality TV star. But this movie doesn't end well for me and you. We will be left holding the bag just as subcontractors were at his Atlantic City casino where he defaulted on about $500 million of debt. And it's only your voice that will change this. Finally, let me get back to my point that we are walking our way into a financial hurricane, the likes of which we've never seen unless we change course. Here are a few predictors of how close we are to this storm actually coming ashore. We have never been as vulnerable financially as we are now as a country. We've gone from being the biggest creditor to the biggest debtor nation. China owns about 1/4 of the national debt held by foreign interests. Our debt level as a percentage of the economy is about where we were when we were fighting the Japanese and the Germans for our very survival during World War II. Net worth numbers are bubbling as a result of the federal government and the Fed pouring money any and everywhere. And it's higher now than it was just prior to the tech bubble meltdown in 2002 and the real estate collapse of 2008. In short, I'm telling you what you already know. Our government finances are a disaster. And we have a long list of disasters playing out in Washington as a result of people there turning their backs on the very principles that our founding fathers fought a revolution to institute. It all begs the question what each of us are going to do to turn this thing around before we lose this remarkable birthright our founding fathers gave us in a constitutionally balanced form of limited government. Now, we don't have to pledge our lives, our liberty, and our sacred honor, but we do have to step to the plate to avoid going the way that so many civilizations have gone before us. Benign neglect is not benign, it's cancerous. And it can only change with people getting in the game and saying enough is enough. It's my prayer that you'll do just that. You love your country? Get involved. Love your kids? Get involved. Love your community and friends? Get involved. The time is now. I hope you'll join us in pushing to reinstitute the principles that made our country great, and in remembering how adhering to sensible and sustainable finances is one of those key principles. Take good care.
Hi, my name is Lynn, and I am a proud delegate from the state of Missouri for the 2020 Convention for Founding Principles. I wanted to bring a different message from the city of St. Louis this evening. Being principled means living in principled ways. I try to love my neighbor and teach my children to love and respect all those around them. I hope you will join me in choosing love and respect over fear.
My name is David Billings, and I'm the state leader for Central Republic, Texas. I want to spend a few moments with you to share my thoughts on principled leadership. As an elected official, it is important we represent the people in an open, honest, ethical, and transparent way. We must set aside party politics and have the courage to solve the problems that face our residents every day. If they depend on us, they expect us to do the right thing, and they want us to be open and honest. As we elect new community leaders in November, we must assist these leaders honor their oath of office and not their oath of party. I hope you have a great and one wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks to former Congressman Mark Sanford, and also thanks to our two delegates. Now it's time to have a little fun, so let's bring in the bros, Brad and Reed. Hey guys, I hope you guys are doing well. This is the final night. The final night. Can you believe it?
Cannot believe it.
Here we are, my man. So Reed, I want to start with you first. And there are a lot of different organizations very similar to ours trying to focus on principles and trying to help heal America, to help us all move forward. But I'm not exactly sure if they're all collaborating the way they should.
Yeah, well, I am honored to be a guest as part of another organization that's here. But this is what I have found that gives me a lot of hope, Shermichael, because there is reason to hope. It's that while we all might have had this anxiety or this worry of criticizing the Republican Party before, something broke in 2016, and it unleashed a willingness to be critical, which I think is really necessary. And I think we're talking about, there was this old order of doing things that was fueled by hate and prejudice and malice, and sometimes folks were more reticent than others to call it out. No more. All these incredible groups that have formed, we've achieved this real consensus around hope, around principles, and upon the fact that we want to be better for our country. So that's, as we move forward, that's what I'm really looking forward to. The unity that we're seeing around these principles is a necessary precondition in order to start making real victories for a value-based movement going forward.
And so, Reed, to follow back up with my original question, do you think we'll see more collaborations between all of these different organizations?
I certainly think so. Not only is that a desire on my part, but I think that's the only way that we're going to achieve victory. And you know what? There is a new civic awakening among those on the center-right or the middle of the political spectrum. It's a new willingness to speak out about faults. There's a new intolerance for intolerance. And those virtues that I see are in all of these groups that are calling out Donald Trump. So because of that, we're going to be able to work together, and we're going to be able to shock the world after November 4th. But it only starts if we defeat Donald Trump. So I want to encourage everybody to vote, to register other people to vote, and to volunteer to work at a poll, because that is going to be crucial during this pandemic election.
Reed, I absolutely second that, my friend. Please register. Please encourage others to do the same, and also sign up to work at a poll. It is so important when we think about what's going on and coming from Mr. Trump. Brad, I want to go to you for a little bit, and I want to talk about our 13 principles. And I don't know who people may vote for, but Joe Biden always says that we're fighting for the soul of America. And I think those words are true.
You know, and I would definitely agree with Joe Biden. One of the things that has been so interesting is to receive the different outreaches that I've received from people over the past 3 nights and even earlier today. And people are talking about the true direction of America. You know, every 4 years we get to hear, you know, the talking heads, and I guess we're part of that group now, but we can hear the talking heads say, this is a crucial election for America. But we're really at a point in time, as Reed said, where people are at a point where they want to talk about the true direction of this country. And it is a battle of right versus wrong. And there's no other way to say that. There's no other ways to skin that cat. There's no ways to say, maybe not. But it's truly a battle for the soul of this country. And I think Joe Biden is right. And he has his finger on the pulse of America when he says that.
So, Brad, I know you had an opportunity to moderate a young voters panel. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did, and I actually walked away from that panel extremely encouraged. I'm so excited that the theme for tonight is out of a mountain of despair, a stone of hope, because the individuals that I talked to in this panel are truly the cornerstone of hope. They're the cornerstone of the foundation of what it takes to move America into the next year, into the next 4 years, into the next generation. And I was so excited. I was so encouraged to talk to these individuals. And so before we even go into that panel, I just want to let people know I was so ecstatic to hear from Zach Beverly, who's a graduate from Campbell University, and who's actually putting his money where his mouth is to run as a candidate down in North Carolina. I got a chance to talk to Dustin Wall, to Elizabeth Broderick, and to Crystal Zhao. And so leading into this panel, I want Americans to be encouraged that this is the future leadership. There are young Americans, principled young Americans, who are out there, who are taking a stand and who are taking the fight to the front lines.
Well, hey, I look forward to watching it. Let's take a look.
So what are the cool issues that millennials, maybe even, you know, we've got some new Gen Zers in the building who might be voting for the first time. What are some of those issues that, you know, Republicans, that conservatives really can connect with young voters on? Crystal, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think the economy is a big deal. I mean, especially now. So with millennials, obviously, as some of you may know, we graduated into the Great Recession. A lot of us couldn't find jobs. And now that COVID has hit, that, you know, means recession for millennials and Gen Z, for everyone else as well. But it's really shaping the millennial and Gen Z worldview. And so what really needs to be addressed right now is like, okay, so kind of what Elizabeth and Zach mentioned, like a human-centered approach to the economy. Like what are we going to do to help people? How are we going to build jobs back up? And another, big factor that has been really top of mind for me is actually automation and tech displacing jobs, which is happening during COVID when, for example, companies are shutting down their call centers to use chatbots, or, machine cleaners are cleaning the airports. I don't think we need to hinder any of this progress, but we need to know how to approach reskilling and educating people for different types of jobs.
Great. Dustin, do you think that there's a blind spot there? Do you think there's anything else that conservatives, that Republicans are missing when they want to actually connect with millennial voters?
Yeah, I think the question is really important, how to connect with millennial voters, but it's also important how and why you ask the question. I think a lot of millennials feel that it's sort of artificial, the way that they're sometimes talked about by conservatives. If you're asking the question as a question of strategy, what should we say and care about and focus on so that it looks like we care about millennials and so that it looks like we care about their issues, then I think people my age will see that as inauthentic and will go somewhere else. So it's not just about the issues, it's also about why we're asking the question. We need candidates who actually do care about the things that millennials care about, rather than just attempting to. And I think the three of the rest of you have made those points pretty well. I would just add that I think a focus on ultimately the human dignity of our fellow Americans is probably the number one thing that I think millennials feel like is lacking in the Republican Party today, in Donald Trump's Republican Party. And that's because when we look at Donald Trump and when we look at those in the party who have defended him over the last 4 years, there is a clear lack of basic respect for human dignity. It seems that Donald Trump can't affirm the phrase e pluribus unum out of many one, and there's a basic lack of respect for the dignity of our fellow people, and that needs to change if my generation is going to go back towards conservatism at all.
Thank you. So Elizabeth, we've been looking at, and I think all the panelists have touched on it, really talking about human dignity. And how do you feel that the conservative movement, that the Republican Party's response to a lot of the social unrest has been when it comes to human dignity that we've seen in, I know 2020 it's felt like the past 3 years, but really has what's looked like, the past 4 to 5 months, with some of the issues stemming from George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. How do you think that response has been, and how do you think millennials have responded to that, responded to the Republicans' response for that?
Sure, I think that's a great question. I think that the Republican response has been pretty poor. There have been opportunities to take a conservative stance on issues like the no-knock warrant that led to Breonna Taylor's death, or even to like wanting small state solutions and not wanting police forces and police unions to have so much power that people that like George Floyd's killers went unarrested for a long time. And so I think millennials are wanting to see these solutions and wanting to see action taken. And it's like conservatives aren't lining up with the messages that they've been giving for so many decades of we want small government and we care about this human dignity and individual rights. And when those rights are being trampled, they're not standing up and saying, whoa, 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 let's do something about this. Instead gaslighting that there aren't racial problems in America, that things are pretty much fixed, people are overreacting. And I think that that is really creating a disconnect with millennial voters who want to see real solutions taken, and also just for people to care and to step forward and provide that leadership.
Yeah, so Zach, and she's talking about leadership, and I think this is so great that we have the opportunity to have you on the panel because you're actually in the middle of running for office. So as you kind of sat down to kind of craft what your platform would be, how did you take into account, connecting with millennials, having that conversation, but then also making sure that, you attract a broader coalition of individuals, whether it be based on race or socioeconomic status or anything like that? What kind of went into creating that platform as you look to the future?
Yeah, well, I think, having compared the principles that we're talking about during this convention, I found a lot of similarities, which was positive for me looking at it then. But I think that the one thing we have to always consider is that, not everyone looks like me, not everyone thinks like me or has the same economic status as me. So we have to take ourselves out of any biases that we have and then compare those to our communities. And the area that I live in is below the state average as far as poverty goes. So I had to examine that. And then also, since the killing of George Floyd, I've had to re-examine my stances on criminal justice reform, something that I don't think I put enough weight on before, but thankfully throughout the revelations we've seen across the country, I've had my eyes opened, I know for sure, and perhaps have seen some of the struggles that I didn't realize were going on, even in my own community in Harnett County. So looking at those areas, those are not issues that just affect millennials or Gen Zs. They also affect people across the country, because in the end, we have to value, as many of us have said here, the human value that we all pose as Americans. Those are the basic values. All men are created equal under the law, whether it's from our police forces or from any of our other institutions. We have to hold them accountable as well as our leaders. And that's going to start with the respect for basic human worth.
Awesome. In the 90s, there was a huge conversation around the term conservative or compassionate conservatism. We kind of saw a resurgence of that as well when George W. Bush came in office in the early aughts. Did you see a resurgence of compassionate conservatism possible, Crystal?
I definitely think it's possible. That's definitely my hope. I mean, I'm optimistic about it. I think we're not in a great place right now. We're going through a lot as a country. But I think, I do have hope for the future, basically, because, talking to this panel, for example, all of you, and I do think, younger Republicans, there's a lot more of us who are more on the compassionate side than older generations, because we do have such a human-focused view of the world, like human rights issues, just really focusing on the individual and making sure that they're doing well. So I have hope. I think it might take us a little bit of time to get there, but yeah, I definitely think compassionate conservatism will come back.
Great. And so Dustin, let me ask, I want to know, let's talk a little bit about the future of young leadership on the right. And when we have a breadth of views here on the panel. Like I said earlier, Zach's a libertarian. He sits a little bit further in a different space, and some of us might sit on the panel as well. But where do we see the future of young leadership on the right? How do you guys feel about that coming up? And I guess I'll ask everybody this question, but I'll start with you specifically, Dustin.
Yeah, well, I think regardless of the specific policy issues, the most important thing I think that young leaders are going to need to do on the right is to take responsibility for the institutions that they're a part of, rather than to allow those who have been leading them in the past 4 years to continue to have control. And that doesn't just look like changing hands in an election. I think it looks like recognizing some of the harms that have been done by conservative leaders, most notably the president, and not just rhetorical harms, but the ways that his words and the ways that his attitude and the attitudes of many of the people who have been supporting and defending him have actually harmed other Americans. And so I think that there's been a failure of citizenship in a way for many young conservatives, because we've sort of been allowing Trump to take our party or our movement, if you will, in a totally different direction. And I think it's up to young leaders in the conservative movement, if there's going to be a conservative movement going forward, it's up to young leaders to take responsibility for their institutions and not just allow the old leadership to do what it's done in the past. That's why I started Save 71, which is an alumni organization of Liberty University alumni, basically aiming to permanently remove our school's old president, Jerry Falwell Jr., and see other changes that we'd like to see at the school. Because we recognize that as Liberty alumni, that institution is a part of us, and so we have some share of responsibility in it. And I think that whether it's the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party or the conservative movement in general or some other institution, we need to recognize what's been done in the past and take responsibility for those institutions so that we can correct those harms.
Great. And Crystal, you are a board member for the Republican Women for Progress. So you guys are moving forward. What does that look like? What does the young leadership look like for the organization?
Yeah, so we have placed a huge emphasis on having or building the pipeline for female candidates for the Republican Party for, myriad of reasons, mainly because, you don't see very many females in the Republican Party in Congress. Excuse me, and for many other elected positions. And so our idea is that, okay, we need to enable women to run for office, not by giving them the right skills and then getting them into office and making sure that we have that broader perspective, because many times these voices are being left out and they have a view of the world and different experiences that are extremely valuable to the rest of American society. But right now, they're being left out of decision-making in legislation. And it's just, we're leaving out this entire population that we could be moving forward with. And our goal is really just to build up that pipeline right now, encourage them, and help as many of them as possible get into office.
Great. So Elizabeth, what does that look like, from your perspective and in the work that you do? How do we make sure that we're ensuring bringing a fresh new voice to different spaces on the right? Everybody can't run for office, right? Everybody's not an activist. What does that look like as we're engaging the new voice for the future?
Interesting. I think in the party structure itself, there's not necessarily much of a place for millennial to participate, or even female millennials. So I think that the work that Crystal is doing is super important. I think ultimately what we have to do is stand where we're able to infiltrate. And whether that's writing op-eds or just participating in your college communities like Dustin at Liberty, joining groups of like-minded people and speaking up where you can, how you can. If you're inclined to run for office, to do that. And even if you're not winning those elections, because that's not where the party is right now, to make those voices and perspectives heard. I think it's important just to consider the opportunities and privileges that you have, and to stand wherever that is and however that looks like.
Thanks, Brad, for that fascinating panel. And guys, I got to tell you, Brad is kind of good, so I may need to start looking for a new job. We want to encourage you guys to continue to comment on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter with the hashtag CFP2020. Our next speaker is the former chairman of the Republican National Committee and the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, Michael Steele.
American, tried and tested for over 244 years. Under its spacious skies, the world's greatest pioneers had the courage to establish the most unique of ideas in history, a nation founded on the principle of government by consent of the governed. This idea would be the wellspring from which the dignity, freedom, and equality of every human soul who stepped on her soil would flow. Over the course of its history would emerge an intangible yet important sense of our own journey as free men and women. How far we have come. What more lies ahead as we anchored ourselves to the principles of our founding. As moment after moment has unfolded, we transcended the essence of our nature so as to keep our progress and cast away our pain, tear down our injustices and sow our compassion, express our love and quell our hate, leverage war for the enjoyment of peace. Our future, like our past, will continue to define the strength of our nation with the light of opportunity and the warm embrace of freedom for generations to come. We call this uniquely American journey the American dream. Now, mindful that the American dream is a journey of many experiences, when you were growing up and you heard that phrase, the American dream, take a moment and remember how it made you feel. Did it sound like something that was part of you? Did it feel like your birthright? Did you even know it was already there for you? Now, in truth, the American dream is really a dream within a dream. In the best of times, we celebrate the American idea in powerful words like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I grew up confident that my inalienable rights were endowed by my Creator. My mama taught me that. And that freedom was not passed down in the bloodstream, as President Reagan reminded us, but rather fought for, protected, and handed on. Now, my mama taught me that too, as she seared that fight for freedom into my heart and steadied my journey toward my dreams with those first principles. But during the worst of times, the barriers we raise and the constraints we impose delay that journey toward the American dream and make more elusive for far too many of our citizens the opportunity to achieve it. Indeed, America must come to terms with a truth that at times the American dream for some comes at the expense of others. Abraham Lincoln proclaimed America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. Forming a more perfect union is hard work, folks, and yet we appear at times to give up on that work. We find it easier to give in to partisan and baser temptations that make our pursuit of happiness a fruitless enterprise, rather than holding out to each other and the world the words of our founding, embodied in our Constitution, that our life and our liberties are valued equally. Historian Alexis de Tocqueville once noted, "There is nothing more dangerous than unmet expectation." And it was the unmet expectations of countless Americans that fueled the fear and anger that defined the 2016 presidential race. We were angry at Wall Street, angry about trade deals, angry about the environment, angry at immigrants, angry about police shootings, angry at the Democrats' overreach, angry at the Republicans' obstructionism, and just plain angry at those who were angry. Frederick Douglass put it frankly, find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them. For years, we quietly submitted to our anger, the bad policies, the wars, the gun violence, the broken promises, and outright lies, and allowed our rage and mistrust to fuel our pain and resentments, imposing on us burdens we were no longer willing to carry, and blinding us to an immutable truth about our very selves, that despite our difficulties, we have always remained resilient and optimistic. This truth about us has been foundational to America's greatness. What is also foundational is America's ideals, expressed in the Declaration of Independence and revealed in the form of government established by the Constitution to help us achieve those ideals in order to form that more perfect union. Moreover, our nation possesses a sovereign character that enables us to dismantle and conquer our flaws and shortcomings. Frederick Douglass's extraordinary ability to say to his former owner, "I love you, but I hate slavery," is an example of how we individually rise above the pain and the anger to fulfill the ideals of America. Now, if we're going to thrive and survive in this third century of this great American experiment, we must never forget that our freedom is empowered by the Declaration of Independence. Our rights are validated by the Constitution, and our equality is affirmed by the Bill of Rights. Each espouses the guiding principles by which we defeat our weaknesses and strengthen our resolve. But we must also remember, even the shortest journey takes time and bears a cost. President George Washington understood that so well when he said, "All through human experience, we find that the highest and most complete freedom comes slowly and is purchased only at a tremendous cost." Our dream within the dream has taught us, notwithstanding those ideals and the heroism and sacrifice of prior generations. After all, we've abolished slavery, expanded suffrage, emerged from a Great Depression, defeated the hegemonic ambitions of Russia. But this journey toward freedom comes slowly, and that along the way, we still remain vulnerable to appeals to more reprehensible elements of our nature and our politics, which leaves us and our republic scarred. So too have our political leaders preyed upon our fears and weaknesses, exposing for their advantage wounds that are not allowed to heal, while they promote a narcissism that belies the very nature of who we are. Now, if we, the people, find ourselves forgetting, questioning, or separating ourselves from the ideals of Washington and Lincoln, the pragmatism of Truman, the resolve of Roosevelt, or the optimism of Reagan, or if we find ourselves caught up in the celebration of self at the expense of our neighbors and our community, then please remember the words of Dr. King, who preached that our nation's ideals call us to serve each other with unharmed truth and unconditional love. My friends, we the people must overcome our current crisis of spirit and faith. This time, we the people must persevere through unspeakable difficulties. This time, we the people must hold on to the example of our ancestors if we truly hope to remain dedicated to our founding ideal, e pluribus unum, out of many one. Then, in this time, we the people must rededicate ourselves to each other. Our dream depends on it. To further understand the American dream, look again to President Lincoln, who reminded us that a nation conceived in liberty could unleash its citizenry and empower them to achieve moral and material progress so dramatic and so exemplary that it would enrich not only the lives of its people, but the world. Or President Reagan, who in his farewell address to the nation noted that after 200 years, the city on the hill still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow has held steady no matter the storm. Undeniably, there are storms ahead, some dangerous, all challenging, that will strike at the heart of what we believe and who we claim to be. But we are strong, and America is stronger because her foundations have been forged out of the sacrifices of her people, from Gettysburg to Fallujah, from Tulsa to Ferguson. America is stronger because the rights of her citizens have been affirmed on our neighborhood streets, across lunch counters, in houses of worship, in places of work, in our courts and legislative chambers. And America is stronger because her dogma has been secured at the ballot box by the consent of her people. Our dream within a dream reveals a nation where the people enjoy the nobility found in those absolute rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our dream within a dream fueled by liberty and lit by the quality of her people is our American dream. We are the people called by our Constitution to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That, my friends, is not a charge given to some governmental agency or a declaration of political ideology or even a line taken from some reality TV episode. It is our single responsibility as citizens and free people. Our journey, our American journey through trials and difficulties from birthright to destiny is a journey about a dream. It is about many dreams that together are the American dream. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jen Schrempf, and I'm from Rock Island, Illinois. I am one of the many delegates that has helped write the founding principles that we have presented this week. I am a proud mother, wife, and educator. I'm very saddened by the way that the Republican Party has turned out under Trump's leadership. I'm sad about the way that Black Lives Matter movement has been handled and the way that he has uplifted the white supremacy groups. I believe that he has unleashed a range of racism that we have never seen before in our lives. His moral fiber is not there, and he is not a godly man. As a Christian, it is important for me to vote my values, and Trump is not my values. I am politically homeless right now due to this administration's handling of many key issues. In short, I will be voting for Joe Biden because I believe that he is what America needs to bring us unified. We are not a unified country right now. It is Republicans against Democrats, and it makes me so incredibly sad. For the people that are politically homeless, this is a very trying time because if you're not on either side, then you're lost in the shuffle. So that is why I am voting for Joe Biden versus Trump. I believe that Joe Biden will bring our people together and restore democracy in the way that it was intended.
Hello, my name is Grant Goodyear, and I'm a high school student from Arlington, Texas. This year I had the great honor of serving as a delegate to the Convention on Founding Principles. I participated in this convention because I believe each and every one of these 13 principles are extremely important, and that it is vital we elect people who will govern our country using these 13 principles. I'm super hopeful that this convention will be a launching point for a much bigger movement that will begin to elect a new wave of politicians on both sides of the aisle who exhibit all of these principles.
Thanks so much, former RNC Chairman Michael Steele, and also thanks to our delegates. I am so excited to welcome our next guest. She's like a big sister to me and one of my dearest, dearest friends. I want to welcome Tara Setmayer. Tara, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Absolutely,
so, Tara,
Shermichael. It's a pleasure. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot coming from my big sister. So Tara, look, I want to talk about politics here. So we know, and we were talking behind the scenes about Rudy Giuliani, and I want to get into this. We're really driving home on this message, law and order. And I got to tell you, there's some data that indicates it's actually working. There's been a 10% increase of Americans who now view protesters negatively.
Yeah, this is a problem. You know, the righteous anger of the American people over the racial injustices they've seen in policing and the criminal justice system were valid. But then when you started to see peaceful protests turn into looting and rioting, it gave the Trump campaign a lifeline to say that here you have these out of control anarchists that are, you know, burning down our cities and creating this very dark dystopian view of America today, when in fact it's only a pocket. You know, there's pockets of people who are doing this, but it doesn't matter because perception is reality, as you know, in politics. And the Democrats and the Biden campaign have got to come out more strongly to condemn the violent acts behind this. Because as you mentioned in the beginning, during the Floyd protests, the American people, including white America, I think was, you know, awakened to something that they weren't really as in tune to as the Black community about what was going on with police brutality. They were on the side of Black Lives Matter. But that has shifted as we saw the violence in Portland and now in Kenosha and other cities around the country, because no one can justify the looting and rioting. That's not okay. But there's issues on both sides of this too, where you have some of the far right-wing extremists who are getting involved in this and agitating, adding to this mayhem that's going on that is not being talked about. So when the Trump campaign talks about what's happening on these streets, they're leaving out the militia groups that are out there. They're not talking about the white militia 17-year-old who decided to go out and shoot some protesters the other night and murdered 2 people. They're not talking about the Proud Boys that are going out there and agitating on the streets. They're not talking about the Boogaloo movement, which is another far right movement that's out there to shoot cops because they want to institute a race war. These are things that are happening in Donald Trump's America. They're acting as though he's some type of bystander here, but he's not president while this is all going on. So, but the Democrats really need to do a better job of condemning this more forcefully and pointing out the absurdity of Trump's argument that this will be Biden's America somehow when it's happening right now.
Right. And Tara, you come from a law enforcement family. Your grandfather was very
Correct.
well respected in your hometown within
Proudly.
the state of New Jersey. And I want to ask you this question because there seems to be this misunderstanding that if you condemn law enforcement, therefore you don't support all law enforcement. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, the mechanics of that you can support law enforcement and still say those among you who are bad must face the consequences of their actions.
Absolutely. My grandfather was captain of the police department in my hometown of Paramus, New Jersey for 40 years. My husband is a 20-year veteran federal law enforcement officer. I am proudly a part of a law enforcement family. I bleed blue and I believe blue lives matter. But the issue here is that they'll tell you in law enforcement that nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And speaking to my law enforcement friends, and I'm still very close to the chief of police in my hometown, you know, and they're very frustrated with the way that the police are being portrayed right now, because there are things that can be done. You can speak out against the bad cops. You can talk about that there may need to be some reorganization of resources in areas that they are deficient. That depends on each locality, though. You know, he'll tell you that better training, better screening, better supervision. You know, there are things within the police industry that need to be fixed, but That's getting drowned out because it's an either or, it's a zero-sum game at this point, and that's not helpful because that's not how you reach a solution. So you can criticize law enforcement officers, and I personally wish that more law enforcement would come out and acknowledge where there are deficiencies and come up with some solutions, because there are examples all across the country of police departments who have made adjustments in order to focus more on community policing and fix the areas where there were problems. I mean, that's what happened in Camden, New Jersey. They actually dissolved their entire police department and started from scratch. And they renegotiated things with the unions and they did different things, and it works for them. And they've had much better police relations in Camden, New Jersey as a result of that. But no one's listening to each other because of we just have a lack of deficit. We have a deficit in leadership, a lack of leadership from the top that's setting the foundation and the environment for people to have a reasonable conversation. Instead, people feel as though they have to go to the streets in order to be heard. And it's okay if it's peaceful, but once it starts turning violent, we have a problem.
No, Tara, I think you are absolutely right. And I want to ask you one more question before we get to your big speech, which I'm so excited about. What do you think principled individuals like ourselves can do in this moment to provide solutions for those Americans who are angry, rightfully so, who are pissed off, rightfully so, and who are downright tired of Donald Trump's divisive rhetoric?
They can vote, vote, vote. Register to vote, make sure your friends are registered, make sure your family's registered, make sure you know where to go to register to vote, make sure that you're aware of your options, what your deadlines are. Find who your supervisor of elections is in your town, in your county. Every state and every district has their own set of rules. We have 50 individual elections in this country. We don't actually have one big election. Every state administers their own election. That's what people can do. We have the greatest right in the world in our democracy is to vote leaders out who we feel are not representing us. And Donald Trump is doing everything he can to try to undermine the most important part of one of our most important parts of our democracy here, by trying to inject this, undermine the integrity of it. Don't let them get away with it. Do not be discouraged by it. And for those who want to feel that they have permission to vote for Joe Biden, this election is not about policy. We can fight those policy fights later. This election is literally about the integrity of our republic. Donald Trump represents an existential threat to our republic, period. Nothing else matters. No bill, no judge, no tax cut, no regulation, nothing matters if what makes this country great, which is our constitutional foundation and the people who adhere to that, if that is no longer in play. We see him breaking norms every day. What we do at Stand Up Republic, what we're doing here with this conference, Principles First, the Lincoln Project, Republican voters against Trump, all of us who are conservatives and Republicans who have had enough of this, we are all literally fighting for the soul of this nation, as Joe Biden has said. So when you look at Joe Biden, you may not agree with everything he says. I certainly don't. I have a lot of policy disagreements with him, but know that he is a good and decent man. And know that you will never have to worry about him tweeting like a 5-year-old. He's not going to cozy up to our enemies. He's not going to violate laws. He's not going to do impeachable offenses. He's not going to do offensive things. We're never going to have to worry about him tweeting, telling people to go back to their shithole countries. You're never going to have to worry about that because Joe Biden is a good and decent man. He's imperfect like everybody else, but he's a good and decent man and understands the role of the presidency, and he will restore some decency back to this country and back into the White House. That's what this is about.
And Tara, God knows we need some decency. CNN political commentator,
Amen.
Sarah Setmayer, thank you so much. Tara, I feel like I can just walk off the set and say, good night, everybody. You dropped the mic on that one, okay? So up next, we're going to hear Tara's speech, and we'll also hear from 2 of our delegates. Let's take a look.
Considered one of the greatest bulwarks of liberty, freedom of the press was enshrined in the First Amendment alongside the freedoms of speech, religion, and assembly. Now, if you notice, political parties aren't mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. But the press is. Why? Because the Founding Fathers understood a free and independent press was an essential check and balance in a free society, a key mechanism of a functioning, healthy democracy. It helps expose both public and private sector corruption. It plays a key role in societal welfare by providing information to maintain an informed citizenry. As Thomas Jefferson said, our liberty depends on our freedom of the press, and it cannot be limited without being lost. It's a pillar of democracy. So let's fast forward to today. Many of our democratic norms, institutions, and ideals are under assault. They're being undermined to further the dangerous and divisive political agenda of a demagogue occupying the White House. From the rule of law, to separation of powers, to the power of the purse, to voting rights. Even the U.S. Postal Service, an American institution since the days of Benjamin Franklin, is being sabotaged from within to further the president's agenda in an attempt to question the integrity of our election system in the event that he loses. His direct attacks against the free press are part of his insidious plot to undermine a fundamental, constitutionally protected institution put in place precisely to inform the citizenry and hold government accountable. These are two concepts at odds with the current administration's incompetent, morally corrupt, and lawless power grabs. Discredit the messengers, evade accountability. Now, tensions between the press and the president didn't start with the current administration. This really isn't new. Throughout history, many presidents had complicated relationships with the press. Even George Washington was bewildered by the unrelenting partisan criticisms of the infamous scribblers, as he once called them. But as frustrated as Washington was, and justifiably so, he never sought retribution or actively declared war against the institution of the free press, because he understood it was an assault on personal liberty. Thomas Jefferson, too, during his second term, became so fed up with newspapers, he actually called them polluted vehicles. Yet, he still maintained the only security of all is in a free press. Getting the news is an inherent part of American life. I can remember as a kid my daily routine of going to get the paper from my grandfather at the end of our driveway in my great home state of New Jersey, and we would oftentimes read it together. Even into adulthood, I would still grab the local paper for him whenever I'd visit, and our conversations were often started around what we read in it, like the latest headlines, community news, or lamenting over how terrible his beloved Mets were doing. I know for many Americans, they can relate to this shared experience. But what is new is the almost daily barrage of lies and attempts to discredit legitimate news reporting on the misconduct of the president and this administration. We need to look no further than the president's own words and tweets. Contrary to what many of his acolytes may believe, most of his actions are not strategic, but rather byproducts of his worst instincts and impulses. However, his decision to attack the free press is deliberate. The repeated vicious attacks strike at the heart of the press's vital role as a watchdog of democracy and guarantor of our liberty. And that's on purpose. The president's repeated use of the term enemy of the people is a perfect example. Enemy of the people was a term often used by authoritarians and dictators like Joseph Stalin to delegitimize dissenters. Lügenpresse, or lying press, was a Nazi-era predecessor to Trump's fake news. It's important to examine why these terms are favored by authoritarians. It was purposeful, because they knew an informed citizenry with access to a free flow of information posed a direct threat to their power over them. Weaponizing fear, undermining institutions, exploiting religion, eroding truth, dismissing any negative reporting as fake news, all tactics straight out of the pages of the authoritarian playbook. So why would an American president ever want to emulate such tyrants? The alarming rise of populist nationalism we've seen within the US in recent years is often a precursor to authoritarianism. This is incongruent with our founding principles. As Americans, we cannot fall victim to the divide and conquer proclivities of such oppressive ideologies. We, the people, can never normalize attacks on our constitutionally protected freedoms. Without an empowered and informed citizenry to hold leaders to account, the people are powerless against the abuses of government. Like Washington and Jefferson's examples, true patriots aren't afraid of a free press or transparency. They fight to protect it, not actively seek retribution or suppression of it. What better way to escape accountability than to send official surrogates out to make Orwellian proclamations about alternative facts, to gaslight the American people into questioning things that were once unquestionable, like science, data, expertise, truth? Of course, the media is by no means above reproach. We have a responsibility to hold the press accountable for bias and inaccuracies when it's truly a problem. But even with these natural challenges, the free press will always be an absolutely indispensable tool for the protection of our freedoms. It's their job to ask hard-hitting questions. It's their job to uncover truth without fear or favor. Where would America be without it? Just look around the world, where freedom is routinely under assault, where courageous journalists risk their lives to report on government corruption, and protesters gather at great risk of imprisonment or worse to stand up for their rights. From Moscow to Tehran, Belarus to Beijing, undemocratic governments routinely suppress the liberty of their citizens with the heavy hand of authoritarianism. Now, in the past, when such events occurred, the world would look to the United States as the gold standard of freedom. Can that be said today? When asked to react to the communist Chinese arrests of government journalists in Hong Kong, the President of the United States was more concerned about economic policy. Since when did our fundamental values come with a price tag? I, like so many fellow Americans, look forward to the day when our president doesn't consider authoritarian crackdowns on freedom of speech as some economic opportunity. America deserves leadership that doesn't put our principles up for sale. This administration's actions against peaceful protesters and the media covering them is more reflective of repressive regimes than of the American tradition of freedom of assembly. The president's decision to unleash unidentified law enforcement officers to encroach on the First Amendment rights of those protesting racial injustice is an affront to those who fought and still fight for our constitutional freedoms to do so. As the proud wife of a federal law enforcement officer and granddaughter of a 40-year police captain, watching officers ordered to violently clear out Lafayette Square in front of the White House, the People's House, so the president could walk across the street to take a photo op with an upside-down Bible, brought me to tears. With each flash grenade and baton strike against innocent Americans, I felt the anguish of the people before us with each strike. That is not the America Abraham Lincoln gave his life for. That is not the America my grandfather's greatest generation fought and died for. That is not the America I grew up in. And that is not the America we want for our future generations. Tear gassing and striking peaceful protesters and reporters is a shameful and morally unjust use of our law enforcement officers and military. And it certainly does not align with our fundamental First Amendment principles. It is our responsibility as Americans to make sure we elect leaders who will uphold these principles, not seek retribution against those who embody them. The press isn't the enemy of the people. Authoritarianism is. Sowing seeds of cultural discord and distrust is. Using propaganda to spread disinformation is. We have a clear choice in this upcoming election that will determine the path of this great nation. Do you want leadership that declares open war on our democratic norms and institutions? Or do we want leaders who respect our constitutionally protected rights and freedoms? In the words of the late great Senator John McCain, if you want to preserve democracy as we know it, you have to have a free and many times adversarial press. And without it, I am afraid, we would lose so much of our individual liberties over time. That's how dictators get started. As part of our social contract as Americans, We are called to be the sentinels in the watchtower of our republic. It is our responsibility as citizens to yell stop athwart history when no one else will. And never, never be bullied into silence. America, it's a time for choosing. Decency over demagoguery, principle over tribalism, truth over propaganda, country over party. Because here, right still matters. For the sake of our blessed constitutional republic, it's time to decide which side of history you want to be on. Because in this moment, it is morally impermissible to be in between.
Hi, I'm Justin Kurth, former Colorado Republican Central Committee executive member and presently Stand Up Republic's Colorado state leader, where I am also a ranked choice voting advocate. In one word, what I would describe this convention on founding principles to be, for me, was refreshing. And refreshing in the sense that, at least in my experience as a military veteran of the United States Marine Corps and the National Guard, when you saw leadership on display, you knew it. And it was refreshing to see that in the Convention on Founding Principles.
Hello, my name is Melvin Edwards, and I live in Crofton, Maryland. I'm happy to be a part of an organization like this, and I'm proud to be a part of the committee that drafted Principle Number 6. We all understand that something needs to be changed about the system itself and about the current occupant of the White House in particular. But it's not enough to just complain. We need to do something about it, something productive, something positive. So I'm happy to be a part of this organization, and I hope other people will join us in making a change, a meaningful change for ourselves, for the future of the country.
I want to again thank Tara Setmayer and also our two delegates. Let's bring in the bros, my favorite two guys, who I am honestly going to miss when this is over. Guys, this is it. I mean, this is it. I don't know what to say. I can't believe it.
I'm with you, Shermichael. It is bittersweet. It is bittersweet.
Reed, we can't have any more jokes, man.
Well, you know what, Shermichael? Actually, I think this is just the very beginning. The defeat of Donald Trump in November is the end of the beginning of the hard work that has to come. And I hope we keep up this joy and be joyful warriors in the back.
That's okay. Let's go to Brad really quickly.
And as we've seen,
Brad, so I want to ask you this question, and Reed sort of started to bring up some very important points. But we've talked about a lot of very serious things, man, and I think people are so tired. They're stressed out. They're depressed. They're uncertain about the future. I want to give people hope because I believe inspiring people is so important to motivating them to get involved, to stay engaged, to living up to the 13 principles we have outlined during this convention. What do you think is next? What should people do? How can they stay involved and how can they stay engaged?
You know, Shermichael, I've been thinking about that all week, and that's been a lot of the questions that I've been fielding in my inbox, whether it be from DMs on Twitter or Facebook or just any other mediums. And really, I want to encourage people, and I think that our theme for tonight is so important. Out of a mountain of despair comes a stone of hope. And I'd like to remind people that it took a single stone from David to slay Goliath. And so when we have these moments that seem insurmountable, when we have these moments like we don't know how to overcome them, I want to encourage people. It's the small things, it's the small stones that count. First and foremost, we need you to go out and vote. Your vote matters. Your vote is your voice in this moment and in this pivotal time in American history that changes things like never before. I want to encourage people now more than ever to go out and vote. I want you to encourage your friends to vote. I want you to encourage your family members to vote. And I want you guys to be a part of this great experiment that has lasted for hundreds of years that we get to so endearingly call America. I want people to be encouraged in this moment in time from the speakers that we've heard over tonight in the past 3 nights who have talked about the promise of America. We've talked about us being a city on a hill. We've talked about us being a space for all to be welcome, for all to be welcome to speak, for all to be welcome to voice their opinion. And I truly believe that America thrives when we have a marketplace of ideas and ideals. So we need to lend your voice to those spaces. I'm so excited about what is to come. But I cannot stress enough that why it's so important for people to go out and vote in November. And I think that it's so important that you vote for your principles, that you vote for what matters, and you vote for an America that can last.
And
lastly,
Brad,
I want to say,
go ahead. Go ahead.
It's so important. I can't stress that enough. It's so important, and there's a reason that we've had these values, that we've had these ideals, that we've had these principles that we've talked about over the past 4 nights.
So Reed, you were so on fire, man. I think you sort of killed the internet. That's why you disappeared on me. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, this is what I want to say. In America in 2020, this principles convention that's going to live on in clips on YouTube and Twitter and the internet, this is our Federalist paper. And just like the words that formed this nation didn't just stay on paper, we have to make sure that our efforts ring out these truths across the country. And one way that we can do that is by taking local action. All of us can draw strength and energy from things like the Convention on Founding Principles and these great national orgs that have cropped up, but we're only going to make a difference if we do the hard work of burrowing into our local communities. So whether that's to reform the Republican Party, to start a new effort, or to just advocate for an issue that you care about, I hope everyone does the hard work of plugging in locally. This can't just stay online, and it won't.
Rita, I have to mess with you really quickly since this is the last time I'm going to see you guys. What are you wearing on your lapel tonight?
I'm wearing the American flag and the Virginian flag, my home.
So next time you're home, my friend, drinks on me. Guys, it has been an absolute pleasure to spend the last 4 days with you guys, and I look forward to truly seeing you guys soon. Let's take a look at some of the RNC convention speeches from over the years. And up next, you'll see some of those interesting speeches as things have changed. Let's take a look.
Whether in the nation's capital, the state capitol, or city hall, private morality and public trust must go together.
The poet called Miss Liberty's torch the lamp beside the golden door. Well, that was the entrance to America, and it still is. The glistening hope of that lamp is still ours. Every promise, every opportunity is still golden in this land. And through that golden door, our children can walk into tomorrow with the knowledge that no one can be denied the promise that is America.
We're a nation of immigrants. We're the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the ones who wanted a better life, the driven ones.
I want a kinder and gentler nation. And we've got to leave that tired old baggage of bigotry behind.
Many people are welcome in our house, but not the bigots.
I believe in tolerance, not in spite of my faith, but because of it.
The right of each individual to be recognized as unique, possessed of dignity and the sacred right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
But if there's anyone who has mistakenly attached himself to our party in the belief that we are not open to citizens of every race and religion, then let me remind you, tonight this hall belongs to the party of Lincoln, and the exits, which are clearly marked, are for you to walk out of as I stand this ground without compromise.
The strength and power and goodness of America has always been based on the strength and power and goodness of our communities, our families, and our faiths.
And I believe America is ready for a new beginning.
It will not be obtained by the sordid politics of pitting group against group.
Much more unites us than divides us.
The presidential campaign is more than a contest of candidates, more than a clash of opposing philosophies. It is a mirror held up to America.
I see only Americans.
We are fellow Americans, and that's an association that means more to me than any other.
Is it a measurement of who we are and where we come from and where we're going?
We have it in our power to begin the world over again.
Though wounded and scathed as outlasted revolution, civil war, world war, racial oppression, and economic catastrophe. We have fought and prevailed on almost every continent and on almost every sea. We have even lost, but we have lasted.
Greatness is found when American character and American courage overcome American challenges.
I'm not running for president because I think I'm blessed with such personal greatness that history has anointed me to save our country in its hour of need.
I do not need to take your pulse before I know my own mind. I do not reinvent myself at every turn. I am not running in borrowed clothes.
My country saved me, and I cannot forget it. And I will fight for her as long as I draw breath, so help me God.
For greatness lies not in what office you hold, but in how honest you are, in how you face adversity, and in your willingness to stand fast in hard places.
The making of a world that will be fit for our children to live in.
To occupy the land with character.
In our best days, we can feel the vibrancy of America's communities, large and small.
The destiny of mankind. The making of a world that will be fit for our children to live in. Hangs in the balance.
That future is our destiny.
After all of the shouting and all of the scandal, after all the bitterness and broken faith, we can begin again.
That future is out there. It is waiting for us.
We must use our power wisely.
Our children deserve it. Our nation depends on it.
For the good of all our people. Every tomorrow has two handles. We can take hold of it with the handle of anxiety or the handle of faith.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. Our work is not done. Our force is not spent.
A prosperous nation is ready to renew its purpose and unite behind great goals.
And to those who say it was never so, that America's not been better, I say you're wrong. And I know because I was there, and I have seen it, and I remember.
Americans live on the sunrise side of the mountain. The night is passing, and we are ready for the day to come.
When you compare those speeches to what we'll likely hear tonight, it goes to show you just how lost the current Republican Party is. But like many of you, I remain committed to fighting for something better because our nation's future depends on it. I'm so excited to introduce our next three speakers. It is because of all three of them that we're here. Their combined leadership, vision, and belief in America should give us all hope. I am so pleased to introduce my dear friends, Mindy Finn, Heath Mayo, and Evan McMullin.
Michael. What a joy it's been to host the Convention on Founding Principles. As I said on night one, I have a long history with party conventions. I was there when George W. Bush was nominated and John McCain and Mitt Romney, and these events have always inspired me to dream bigger, work harder, and do my civic duty to leave our nation better off than we found it. Thank you all so much for joining us these last 4 nights. Some have asked, who is this convention for? And really, that's kind of a complicated question. It's a Republican convention, but it's not that convention. And I'll admit that sometimes this isn't that simple to explain because, while I considered myself a conservative for as long as I can remember, this is not a moment for partisan labels and tribal identities. This is America's moment. Americans are being tested. Each of us are challenged in this moment, in this critical election year, to show how much we care about the freedom and liberties that our founders gifted us with over 240 years ago. Do we really believe that all Americans are equal? These are the kinds of questions that we are being tested to ask. Is this a thing that we just say while we know it's really lip service, some old words in some old aspirational document written by our founders who really just didn't have their feet on the ground? When they wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," did they really mean it? Maybe guess what? These words were just words. True, they left out women. Many of them were slave owners, and they didn't necessarily consider Black men to be of equal worth. And, maybe because they were imperfect and their words didn't match their deeds, well, then we don't need to match our words and our claims to believe in equality with our deeds. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that our founders' intent was right. Their words were true. We just cannot give up on them now. America is the only, let me say that again, America is the only multi-ethnic democracy in the world and in the history of civilization. No multi-ethnic democracy has ever succeeded. That is a daunting thought. But we're an imperfect country. It's important to recognize that. But we've been able to remain relatively peaceful and relatively stable and march ever forward, making progress on civil rights and equality because of our founders' words and our founding documents and ideals. The concept that every human being is equally valuable and that their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is self-evident. The American experiment is a worthy one. In fact, it is everything, as we've been hearing throughout these 4 days. Our commitment to equality is not easy to keep. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But wouldn't it be something if we were responsible for making America that first successful, thriving, and lasting multi-ethnic democracy, the first to stay true to our commitment to value human dignity for all, and model a new way of being strong, diverse and strong with many different backgrounds and faiths and beliefs, but united in our love and commitment to liberty and a deeply held sense of duty and pride in these United States, not because of some false bravado, but because of our inherent and exemplary decency. I became a Republican as a young person, not because I was privileged, but because of a family history of struggle. My great-grandparents came to America to escape persecution, and I grew up with a single mom who, worked incredibly hard to ensure I had the opportunity to be what I wanted to be. I recognize now, though, despite those struggles, there were so many others who face deeper barriers to opportunity. And something that I identified early on as a young Republican that really, really gnawed at me is that this was a party that talked a big game on standing for equal opportunity and was empathetic and said it was empathetic, and that its freedom-loving, God-embracing, family-centered, flag-waving party was equally open and appealing to people no matter who they are. And yet now this is a party that has taken a dark turn. It's one that appeals to white grievance, while Black men are treated with glaring and women with glaring inhumanity as they're gunned down in the streets. Parties should not stand for color. All parties should be able to say that Black lives matter.
Good evening. I want to talk tonight about something.
And not feel the need to say that all lives matter. Because of course all lives matter. But all lives can't matter until Black lives matter, or women's lives, immigrants' lives, the list goes on, or Americans who have unequal access to jobs, education, healthcare, and even the act of voting itself. You've tuned in over the last 4 days, or caught us after the show online. I want to leave you with this one message. We hope you enjoyed the show, that it inspired you, that it gave you hope, most of all, that it fired you up to go out there, socially distanced and safely, and get to work. Lately in my house, my young sons, 8 and 6, have discovered Hamilton the musical, and they love to hum and belt out the songs "I'm Not Throwing Away My Shot" is heard throughout our house quite often. A truer, more American mantra has never been spoken. It's about the light in each of us, the power bestowed upon us to leave our mark in the world. It's about joining a movement to fight for freedom. Like the time of our founding, we are a nation experiencing great turbulence. The progress we have experienced technologically, industrially, culturally in the 21st century has not been without cost. And every 70 years or so since our founding, when the world has experienced rapid and accelerated change, there's unrest. And that unrest, too, has not been without cost. But here's the thing. We are the United States of America. In less than 2 centuries, we went from a powerless, dependent place to the world's greatest superpower and the envy of nations around the world. We are not giving that up. We are not throwing away our collective shot without a fight. And we're smarter now. I know that we are. We can fight with integrity, with ideas, decency, and truth. We can show strength through peace here at home, through service to others, and by putting the interests of our nation above any party, legacy, tribal identity, and even above ourselves. Right now, your nation needs you. Your nation cries out for you to put on your tennis shoes or sneakers, as my mom always called them, and volunteer. If you can do so in person, volunteer to be a poll worker. There's an extreme shortage due to the pandemic. You may not be knocking doors right now, but you can print your own materials and drop them off with personal notes to your neighbors. I'm sure your neighbors would really appreciate that right now. A lot of people feel very isolated. Send a letter to your family and friends and encourage them to do their civic duty and vote. This is your shot, and this is your America. Let's make it the best that it can be for all. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to talk tonight about something that doesn't get a lot of airtime from politicians in Washington these days: the future of our country and what we plan to do now so that over the coming years, we write a story of American success and not decline. Because let's face it, if you think about where we're at in our politics these days, between all of the chaos and confusion, America is falling behind. I mean, we know this is true. We don't need some stat to tell us that. Today in America, our children are falling behind because our education system is stuck in the 1970s. Our workforce is falling behind because we continue to shield it from global competition with the heavy hand of government. And our government also falling behind because year after year, we saddle it with more and more debt, hamstringing our ability to address everything else. And the Constitution is also falling behind because so many shrug nowadays when those in power disrespect it. But worst of all, most concerning of all, is that many around the world are starting to wonder whether democracy itself is falling behind. Because you see, in America, truth is the thread that holds our experiment together. And that thread is starting to fray. Our enemies know this. It's why Russia and other countries are starting to attack the truth with disinformation campaigns meant to turn Americans against one another so that we don't focus on the substance of our problems. They know that the only way that they can beat democracy is to cloud the truth and make us question who we are and doubt the intentions of our neighbors. And that is exactly what they're doing. And unfortunately, the Republican Party, my party, isn't doing much to help these days. In fact, it often seems like they're making things worse, fueling the disinformation and division. Republicans in Congress will say one thing to get elected. They'll sing the praises of the Constitution, of limited government, of living within our means, but then do whatever they want once they're in power. The Republican Party just isn't principled. It couldn't even be bothered to draft a platform this year. It doesn't stand for anything except Donald Trump. Under its current leadership, the Republican Party is completely without solutions, and its future is bleak. That has to change. It must, because if it doesn't, the party deserves to be replaced. That's why we can't look to the party. We can't depend on it. We have to look to our principles. We need a new generation of leaders to stand up and start offering bold ideas that will push our country in a better direction. I believe those ideas ought to be rooted in opportunity. Opportunity is at the core of the American ideal, that anyone, no matter their race, creed, gender, or circumstance, can apply themselves to a pursuit and succeed. It's why we've long celebrated the pioneer, the self-starter, the entrepreneur, because they typify what it means to be an American. Because being an American isn't about looking a certain way or talking a certain way. It's about being a certain way. It's about a set of values, being self-reliant and driven, compassionate and enterprising, energetic and creative. It's who we are as a people. It's what makes us the greatest country in the world. Our politics and our policies ought to encourage that spirit So what does that look like in practice? Well, I'd like to offer just a few ideas that could create opportunity in America. It starts by realizing that a quality education is the single best ticket for a child born to low-income parents to rise and achieve their dreams. We need to recognize that grade school is a better place to combat poverty than the welfare line. If you're a kid that grows up in America, you want to enjoy the same opportunity, whether you grow up in a poor rural neighborhood in the Midwest or the Upper East Side of Manhattan. That's going to mean improving our schools and strengthening families. It's going to require transforming our classrooms into laboratories of opportunity and not being afraid to boldly experiment until we discover the best way to educate kids. We can't rest until every kid in this country has the same opportunity to go to a top-rate school that gives them a fighting chance at success, no matter where they're from or how much money their parents make. And creating opportunity can't end in the classroom, because it doesn't. If you work in America, you ought to be able to chase opportunity by learning new skills or changing jobs more easily. We live in the most innovative and disruptive time the world has ever known. And our workforce has to be just as adaptive, because the economy isn't waiting for us to catch up. By 2030, one study finds that automation and innovation will require up to a third of our workforce to either learn new skills or switch jobs entirely. What are we doing now as a country to prepare workers to seize that opportunity? I mean, we got to be honest about this, because if we continue to outpace the rest of the world and continue to be a global economic leader, it won't be because we coddled our workers and increased our tariffs by 30%. It'll be because we believed in our workers, that we invested in them and we trusted in their ability to out-innovate and outwork the rest of the world. And we need to realize that we can't seize opportunity as a country unless we all are able to seize it together. Because in a perfect world, opportunity would not discriminate on the basis of our skin color. But we do not yet live in that perfect world here in America. Black children graduate high school at lower rates than their white peers and are incarcerated at 5 times the rate. One study found that if your name is Jamal or Lakeisha, you have to submit up to 50% more resumes to get a job interview than you would if your name were Greg or Emily. And that's if the resume were otherwise completely identical. That is not making good on the American promise. If we're going to go out and capture opportunity, we have to be healthy. And that means having a healthcare system that works. It also means caring not just for the unborn, but also for the mothers and fathers who watch after those children after they're brought into the world. They have to be our concern as well. And we have to realize that none of this is possible. None of this is achievable if we neglect our national soul and character. This is so important. It's the foundation of everything. We need leaders with good moral character, people who put the interests of the country before their own. We also need people who respect the truth, the Constitution, and the rule of law, and who apply them even-handedly. Because if you're an American and you take the great risk of pursuing opportunity, and look, it's a great risk. It takes a lot to put your effort and energy into something. And if you do that, you have to trust that your government and your courts will give you a fair shake. So look, we can't sugarcoat it. Time is of the essence. But every day that we spend distracted by the latest tweet or the latest outrage is just another day that we fall further behind. That's not the America I know. And it's not one that we should accept. We are an exceptional country, a country that leads not by the force of its boast, but by the righteousness of its example. I'm ready for America to lead again. I hope you are too, and I think this convention is a hopeful start. Thank you for being a part of it, for raising your voice, and for defending the founding principles of liberty and equality that make America good. We can build the future we want together. We don't have to wait. So with a steady confidence, humility, and the blessings of a just God, let's get to work. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for joining the Convention on Founding Principles, and to our incredible delegates, speakers, team, and partners for making this possible. Many of you, like me, know this is a pivotal moment in our history. we've grown increasingly concerned for our nation. Some feel politically homeless as leaders they once trusted have so casually abandoned the country for personal interest. Now many are losing loved ones, struggling to pay rent, and suffering isolation during this pandemic era. Others wonder if there's still a place in America for them, or if their children will have a safe country in which to grow up, learn, and pursue their own American dreams. These challenges threaten our prosperity, freedom, and lives, but they are not insurmountable. On the contrary, they give us a greater opportunity than we've had in generations for a renewal of America, a strengthening of America, if we choose it. The truth is that humankind's fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a promise contained in our Declaration of Independence, is eternal, and it's our greatest purpose. In this struggle, we learn who we really are and who we must be. More than a passport, a birth certificate, or naturalization papers, it's what truly makes us Americans. In the late 1600s, nearly a century before the birth of our nation, my ancestor Alexander McMullin arrived in this choice land, ultimately settling in Salem, Massachusetts. Like many others, he had fled hardship in Ireland and made the harrowing journey across the North Atlantic in search of freedom and opportunity. 3 generations later, Alexander's great-grandson Archibald joined the impossible fight for American independence against our British oppressors, serving 2 9-month enlistments in George Washington's Continental Army. In 1841, his son Henry, a carpenter and shipbuilder in Maine, and his wife Mary exercised their religious liberty and joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They, along with many of their fellow members facing violent persecution by government and others for their beliefs, left behind their businesses and familiar lives in New England, making the long, perilous journey across the American plains and through the Rockies on foot, finally finding true freedom to worship as they pleased in the soaring mountains of now Utah. Centuries later, this family history inspired my service with the CIA in the War on Terror and beyond. These are fundamentally American stories, and not at all unique. American women pursuing the right to vote for many decades, Native Americans winning citizenship and inclusion in this new nation in the land of their inheritance, Japanese Americans yearning to be recognized as fellow patriots rather than enemies based on their ethnicity alone, African Americans fighting for basic recognition of their personhood and equal rights to share in all aspects of American lives, a struggle for equality that still continues today, even as women and LGBTQ Americans fight for equal opportunity in the workplace, and Jewish, Muslim, and Hispanic Americans fight for even their right to life, a safe life in this land. These are American stories too, and they show the worst flaws and the greatest strengths of this nation all at the same time. And that's what truly makes them American. More than a place, America is a journey, an everlasting journey to a more perfect realization of the self-evident truths that we are all created equal and free. This journey is not just a task that can ever be checked off our to-do lists and forgotten, because there will always be those who stand in our way for their own dark purposes. No one will ever just hand us perfect liberty and justice for free, and yet there will always be someone who wants to take them away. Whether Republicans, Democrats, or Libertarians, or Independents, and whether we like it or not, we share this journey. Our future is one. Together, we've reached a crossroads in 2020, a choice between 2 very different Americas, a choice between liberty and tyranny. President Trump offers us one path. He wants America to be like Russia, a country defined by fear, corruption, and isolation, a country not for a people, but for one man, a country lost in conspiracy, a country without real elections, a country where the law is a political weapon, a country where people fear the police, a country turned against itself. Does this sound familiar? It should. This is the America that Trump has spent the last 4 years creating. His constant lies, attempts to corrupt our elections, purge of law enforcement leaders, attacks on independent press, weaponization of the Department of Justice, removal of inspectors general, use of secret police against the people, efforts to divide us against each other, foreign backing. These are the acts of a dictator. This is Donald Trump, and we must realize that he is the greatest threat to our liberty in at least a generation. But rising to the threat he poses offers a chance for a better America. Not an America that's just more like the one we knew before Trump came along, but a stronger, more just America. An America where we uphold the Constitution together. An America where opportunity is finally available equally to all of its sons and daughters. Where we hear Black Lives Matter as a basic truth, not controversy. Where the government is accountable to all the people, not just the privileged few. Where we fight just as hard for the rights of others as we do for our own. Where we abandon the politics of division and build on common ground. Where we use science, facts, and logic to find solutions to modern problems. An America where we treat each other with compassion, not contempt. For many, choosing between these two Americas will require us to do something we've never done before, crossing party lines to support a unifying presidential candidate of another party. But friends, this is exactly what we must do. Above all, being principled must mean saving the republic, even when it takes us out of our political comfort zones. Being principled can't mean that we're held hostage by partisan loyalty or habits, or that we're paralyzed by purity tests, or that we won't work with our rivals even when we agree. In order to protect this republic, we must make common cause with our fellow Americans based on our shared principles, even as we continue debating the rest. I don't expect Joe Biden to govern as the principled Republican I wish were now leading the party. He's a Democrat. Although I firmly believe there's far more common ground between most Americans on even the most difficult issues than most of us realize, I know that I'll differ with some decisions Joe makes as president. And I know that he's not perfect because none of us are. But most importantly, I believe Joe to be an honorable patriot who's loyal to the republic and who cares about all of us, no matter what party we belong to, no matter what we look like, and no matter what we believe. As a young officer nearly 20 years ago, I remember quietly sitting in the back of an Amtrak train, traveling northbound from Washington, D.C. to New York City. I recall seeing a gray-haired gentleman greet nearly every person in the car, pausing with each to ask about their families and lives, consciously building each and every one of them up in the moments they shared. What struck me about the man, whoever he was what I perceived to be his sincere compassion for his fellow travelers on that journey. Not just because he knew many of them, but because that's who he was, because he genuinely cared about his fellow human beings. Serving them in this small way seemed to make him happier and happier as he did it. I later realized that man was Joe Biden. Such concern for the people of our country must be a basic requirement for any president. Watching Joe's service over the years, I don't believe his acts of kindness that day were an anomaly or insincere, but rather a small example of the man he is. And that's why I plan to put country over party and in November cast my vote for Joe. Imagine the America we can have with a president who actually wants to preserve the republic, who builds us up and unites us, who listens to experts and embraces facts, who puts our interests above his own. Imagine that America, my friends. Imagine. It won't be easy, but if we're willing to reach for it, we can have it. In the weeks ahead, Trump, Republican leaders in Washington, and their foreign backers will try to prevent us from having a free and fair election, doing their best to mislead us, turn us against each other, and make good men and women seem bad. We must be ready to choose facts over lies, hope over despair, love over fear, and good over evil. We must be ready to defeat Donald Trump. And in this year and in those that come, we must also send his enablers in Congress home too. Men and women who have abandoned the Constitution, truth, and decency cannot represent us. If the GOP is to be saved or defeated, It will only be when a movement of Americans committed to principles first replaces them. We will continue our fight in elections across the nation until we do. But let us now seize this moment, not only to defeat the darkness of Trumpism, but to resume the American journey that our ancestors started nearly 250 years ago at Trenton and continued then at Gettysburg, Selma, and Seneca Falls. We must do as they did, acting with courage, commitment to founding principles, and an enduring hope for the America that can be. My dear friends, though darker days may still lie ahead, I believe that this is not the twilight of our great republic, but a precious opportunity for its rebirth. This is my hope, my prayer, and my pledge. May God bless you, and may God bless America.
Thank you to Mindy, Heath, and Evan. And I'm not sure about you guys, but after those speeches, I feel pumped up. I feel energized about the future. And that is why I want to encourage you guys to be engaged. It has been my distinct pleasure to be joined by so many principled guests and speakers over the last 4 nights. But the greatest honor has been to be joined by all of you sitting at home, tweeting, commenting on YouTube, commenting on Facebook. The Convention on Founding Principles would be nothing without your participation. And the fact that tens of thousands of Americans have tuned in each and every night across multiple platforms proves that there is still hunger in our country for decency, honor, and integrity. But before we go, I want to make a few remarks. Like so many of you, I have always believed that conservatism is more than a political creed. It is a way of life. It is an approach to matters both public and private that upholds certain principles and values. Conservatism is also a temperament. It offers a moral and ethical compass through which to approach life, how to treat people, how you address the world's challenges, and especially how one comports oneself in a position of leadership. To be a conservative, in the words of influential British political philosopher Michael Oakeshott, is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbounded, the near to distant to the sufficient, to the superabundant, to the convenient to the perfect. You see, I believe in the words of President Lincoln, the great emancipator, that the job of perfecting our union requires incremental and gradual progress, respecting the good that we have built and removing the bad. On a personal note, an individual level, conservatism is a disposition appropriate to a man or woman who is acutely aware of having something to lose which he has learned to care for, or a man in some degree rich in opportunities for enjoyment, but not so rich that he can afford to be indifferent to loss. As a conservative, I am so grateful for all the gifts that come with being an American, but I'm not willing to throw it all away in the pursuit of power or fads of the day. I am also aware of the precarious democracy that we have and the importance of preserving our republic. It requires constant vigilance against the tendency to be lax in our observance of democratic principles. Now, right now, if you turn on the news, Donald Trump is speaking. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Trump. Trump blatantly uses the office of president to harm those he believes to be his political enemies, especially in the media. And this has troubling and potentially devastating implications for our union. Donald Trump sows the seeds of discord and foments anger, confusion, and conflict because he believes it serves his interest and not ours. And as a result, the Republican Party has become a moral decay. Leadership of principles, of morals, of ethics, of values are important, and that's what we should demand out of our leaders. In order to extricate ourselves from the plague of this toxic leadership that we're currently confronting, we must strengthen the courage of our convictions and refuse to cower or be bullied into submission. So, I want to urge each and every one of you to connect with your fellow Americans and stay a part of this founding principles family. And to do that, go to cfp2020.us. Again, that's cfp2020.us and register to be a part of this movement going forward because we can't do it without you. Send us your own CFP speech. And above all, share these videos and our principles with your family and friends. My friends, I have to thank you all so much for being concerned about this democracy. And thank you again for participating in the first ever Convention on Founding Principles. And as we say goodnight, let's take a moment to reflect on the positive, enduring messages we've heard this week. Thank you, and God bless America.
Forming a more perfect union is hard work, folks, and yet we appear at times to give up on that work.
Many of our democratic norms, institutions, and ideals are under assault.
Many people around the world begin to question America's commitment to liberty.
It's real painful to admit, but the fringe has a very firm foothold in Republican politics. If it's not taking it over completely, it's hard to tell.
Many people say, oh, the president is right. And actually, for America, that's not right. The president lies about the election because he doesn't think he'll win.
Donald Trump's presidency represents a continuing frontal assault on the truth, on the very idea that truth even exists. It began with the first lie about his inauguration crowd being bigger than Barack Obama's. But so many lies, thousands of them, have followed that we risk becoming numb to it. And in that numbness, there's danger.
I'm absolutely convinced that Donald Trump should not be our president going forward, and that we have to get together as a group. We have to put our patriotism first.
The United States of America is seen as that beacon of hope throughout the world. And it is time for us to reclaim that mantle of leadership.
One that speaks to more than just a very small handful of people, a group of people that live on the extremes.
We want people who want to dream. We want people who want to reach, to want to achieve. We welcome people who thrive, people who are not satisfied, but they want to do more. That is what makes this the greatest country in the world.
You love your country? Get involved. Love your kids? Get involved. Love your community and friends? Get involved. The time is now.